It is 3 a.m. in New York, 8 in The Hague, and 4 on Tuesday afternoon here in Seoul. I'm Moon Gun-young. This is ARIRANG Korea's only global network. Less than a day has passed since the two Koreas peppered each other's territorial waters with artillery shells in the latest sign of rising inter-Korean tensions. South Korea's defense ministry says the military's new rule of an eye for an eye, just 3 times stronger, was put to action on Monday. And on this Tuesday, no signs to indicate another provocation is coming. Our defense ministry correspondent Kim Hyun-bin has our top story.
South Korean Defense Ministry spokesperson Kim Min-seok in a press briefing on Tuesday said there are currently no signs that North Korea is preparing for any additional provocations. But he added that the South Korean military is ready just in case.
We will retaliate if North Korea attacks again at an appropriate level to stop their provocations.
The ministry says the artillery rounds fired on Monday afternoon were from multiple rocket launchers, which lack accuracy, especially compared to the precision of the K-9 self-propellant heavy artillery used by South Korea. Officials say that out of the 500 shells fired by the North during a live-fire military drill, around 100 fell almost 3.5 kilometers over the border in South Korean waters near Baekneungdo Island. South Korea responded by shooting 300 K-9 self-propelled heavy artillery shells into North Korean waters and dispatched several F-15 fighter jets to the maritime border. The South Korean military is closely working with the United States and keeping a close watch on Pyongyang's moves. Seoul's military has activated crisis management operations and deployed naval convoys near the maritime border to cope with any possible contingency. Several inter-Korean skirmishes have taken place around the area over the years, including the North shelling of Yeonpyeongdo Island in 2010, which killed 4 South Koreans. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News.
So North Korea is once again finding itself on the receiving end of international criticism for firing all those artillery rounds into South Korean waters. The U.S. has slammed Pyongyang for its actions, and even North Korea's closest ally, China, has expressed its deep concern. Our UDN has this report.
The United States called North Korea's firing of around 100 artillery rounds into South Korean waters on Monday as dangerous and provocative, adding that Pyongyang's threats will only isolate the regime even further.
We remain steadfast in our commitment to the defense of our allies, and we remain in close coordination with both the Republic of Korea and Japan.
U.S. State Department Deputy Spokeswoman Marie Harf said she was concerned about North Korea's deliberate decision to further escalate tensions.
They can choose to further escalate, or they can choose to come in line with their international obligations and rejoin the international community. Unfortunately, what we've seen recently particularly is the former.
U.S. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel urged North Korea to discontinue such provocations. He said he would discuss the issue with his Chinese counterpart during a trip to Beijing next week. China's Foreign Ministry spokesman Hong Lei expressed concern over the rising tensions on the Korean peninsula and called for restraint from both sides.
All sides should remain calm and not do anything to worsen tensions. The two should work to protect peace and stability on the Korean peninsula.
The two Koreas on Monday afternoon exchanged fires across the disputed Western Sea border known as the Northern Limit Line. Pyongyang has been raising its levels of threats in recent days after the United Nations condemned its mid-range missile launches last week and against a backdrop of joint military drills between South Korea and the United States. Yurian, ARIRANG News.
Now, experts continue to scramble to interpret what North Korea meant when it threatened a new form of nuclear test earlier this week. Some believe the regime was hinting that it's working on a bomb that would pack more punch than the 3 previously tested. Kim Min-ji has the details.
North Korea is believed to have used plutonium-based bombs in its first and second nuclear tests in 2006 and 2009. Although not confirmed, experts believe their third test last year used a uranium-based bomb since the detonation was 2 times greater than in previous tests. The difference between the materials is significant. Plutonium is made by reprocessing fuel used in nuclear reactors. It is a long process and requires a large reprocessing facility. Uranium, on the other hand, requires only an enrichment process. With just a centrifuge, a nuclear bomb can be produced almost anywhere, even in a two-story building. North Korea is said to have the ability to greatly expand its nuclear bomb reserves because of plentiful uranium deposits, which also have a long half-life.
There is a high chance that plutonium will not explode because the explosive device is elaborate. However, uranium involves a relatively simple technique. If the two are separated and put together, it will explode 100% of the time.
However, there are limitations. Miniaturizing a uranium bomb and mounting it on an intercontinental ballistic missile is impossible. So how does this all relate to the North's recent threat to carry out a new form of test? Experts say it could mean the regime is looking at trying out a reinforced type of nuclear weapon. If tritium and heavy hydrogen are placed in the core of a bomb and surrounded by plutonium and uranium, it can increase the explosive power by up to 10 times. It is more powerful than a regular nuclear bomb, but less so than a hydrogen bomb. Such a bomb can be easily miniaturized and also has the advantage of being light. Kim Min-ji, ARIRANG News.
South Korea has slammed North Korea for slandering President Park Geun-hye. Seoul's Unification Ministry responded Tuesday to remarks out of Pyongyang that denounced President Park's recent comments on the North's economic difficulties. They were part of the president's speech on reunification in the German city of Dresden last week. The North main Rodong-Sinmun newspaper said the president's comments were insulting and called the South Korean leader derogatory names. The North had pledged earlier this year to end all cross-border verbal attacks. South Korea's Unification Ministry said the remarks are an example of the regime's inconsistent nature and that they raise suspicions about whether it is serious about mending inter-Korean ties. Now, plans to put up a statue honoring comfort women in an Australian city are gaining traction, but the Japanese government is trying to throw up roadblocks. A spokesman for the Japanese embassy in Australia told the Sydney Morning Herald that plans by Koreans in Chinese communities to commission the statue are misguided. The statue would honor women forced into sexual slavery by the Japanese military during World War II. The community is expected to submit a request to establish the statue to the Strathfield City Council on Tuesday. Korean exporters aren't just weathering the storm of economic uncertainties abroad, they seem to be thriving. In fact, the nation's exports rose to their second highest mark on record in March. ARIRANG's Hwang Ji-hye has this report.
Korea's trade ministry said Tuesday that the nation's exports rose 5.2% last month from the same period a year earlier to over $49 billion. That is the second highest mark on record following the highest monthly figure of over $50 billion posted in October last year. The ministry attributed the rise to growing shipments to advanced economies, including the United States. Exports to the U.S. jumped 17% in March from the previous year, while those to the European Union rose 15%. Korea's exports to the U.S. in particular slowed in the first 2 months of the year due to the harsh winter there, with the rate of rise remaining in the single figures. By product, mobile communication devices such as handsets soared over 30%, with shipments of automobiles rising 16%. Korea's imports, meanwhile, reached $45 billion last month, up 3.6% from the previous year, helped by an increase in purchases of consumer goods. The trade surplus came to around $4.2 billion. The Trade Ministry expects the domestic economy to continue its pace of export growth in the second quarter of this year on improved economic conditions in advanced countries. Hwang Ji-hye, ARIRANG News.
Now, retailers in Korea are feeling better about the pace of the nation's economic recovery. Business sentiment among them for the coming months has hit a nearly 3-year high. According to Korea's Chamber of Commerce and the Trade Ministry, the country's Business Survey Index for the second quarter jumped to 113. That's up 9 points from 3 months ago to its highest level since the third quarter of 2011. Now, a reading above the benchmark 100 means that optimists outnumber pessimists. The index has been on the rise for 4 consecutive quarters now, and improved conditions were projected across the board, especially in the semiconductor and machinery sectors. Now, it's been exactly 10 years since Korea's first ever free trade agreement with Chile came into effect. Korea's auto industry has benefited the most from the country's FTAs. The nation's farmers, however, are less satisfied with the trade deals. ARIRANG News' Na Hyung-kyung reports.
The trade volume between Korea and Chile has jumped 4.5 times to more than $7 billion over the past 10 years. Exports grew from $500 million to $2.5 billion, while imports more than quadrupled to $4.7 billion, according to the Korea Customs Service. Given that Korea's overall trade volume increased about threefold in the same period, experts say the trade sector has without question benefited from the Korea-Chile FTA. Since 2004, Korea has entered into 9 free trade pacts with a total of 46 countries, and the nation's automobile industry remains the biggest beneficiary. But very real concerns linger over the impact on the nation's agricultural industry. In order to minimize the negative effects on the domestic agricultural sector, experts are calling for reforms in the market's retail structure.
For items that are dominant in the market, more open competition needs to be in place so that the consumers can reap the benefits. Korea's retail industry also tends to be monopolistic. Diverse retail channels will help products compete in a fairer manner.
Questions over whether the nation's small and mid-sized firms have seen any benefits also remain. A survey conducted by the Korea International Trade Association shows that although 60% of the nation's SMEs with sales of less than $9.3 million utilized the FTAs, nearly half felt that the trade deals had not helped them in any way. Trade officials have called for more detailed and customized information to be readily available to the SMEs so that they can strategize and pave themselves an easier path into the overseas market. Na Hyun-kyung, ARIRANG News.
When the latest news meets the latest business stories, we give you a bigger and better picture of the world. Business Today with Moon Gon-young. Every weekday, only on ARIRANG.
Open an era of trust and peace on the Korean Peninsula. Speaking at the annual U.S. Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen says there is still room for the central bank to help the economy. Now, she offered a passionate defense of the Fed's easy money policy on Monday, making clear the struggling U.S. job market will continue to need the help of low interest rates for some time to come. Here's our Chim Young-gil with this story.
In her first public speech since becoming Fed chair 2 months ago, Janet Yellen cited the struggles of 3 American workers to back up the central bank's policies of low interest rates and continued bond buying. She said considerable slack still exists in the job market, a sign that further monetary stimulus can still be effective.
I think this extraordinary commitment is still needed and will be for some time. And I believe this view is widely shared by my fellow policymakers at the Fed.
The Fed has held interest rates near zero for more than 5 years now. The central bank says it will keep rates there for a considerable time even after it ends its bond buying program, which is on course to be wound down later this year. Yellen said the U.S. economy remains well short of the Fed's goals of maximum sustainable employment.
I believe the Fed's policies will continue to help sustain progress in the job market. But the scars from the Great Recession remain, and reaching our goals will take time.
U.S. stocks rose on Monday, with the Standard & Poor's 500 ending March with moderate gains. Yellen's remarks calmed investors, many of whom had grown anxious the Fed might raise short-term rates by mid-2015. Chim Young-gil, ARIRANG News.
Well, Samsung SDI, the group's unit in charge of developing battery technologies, and affiliate Tail Industries have merged, creating Samsung's 5th largest business unit. Our Connie Kim has the details.
The world's leading TV display and smartphone battery manufacturer, Samsung SDI and Tail Industries, the group's chemical and electronics material unit, have merged, creating a giant parts and materials company. Starting out as display producer, Samsung SDI has expanded into making rechargeable batteries. Tail concentrates on its chemicals and electronics materials business after it sold its fashion division to Samsung Everland last year. SDI says it hopes the acquisition creates a synergy effect by combining its battery business line and Tail's electronics materials used in semiconductors and displays.
The merger with Chile Industries gives SDI access to Chile's electronics. It also makes Samsung SDI more competitive in the secondary battery sector.
With the merger, Samsung SDI will be the corporation's fifth largest business unit with a market capitalization of some $9.3 billion. The company expects to see its sales expand more than threefold from $8.9 billion in 2013 to $27 billion by 2020. The merger has also shown some light on the succession of business divisions within the group. Samsung Electronics Vice Chairman Lee Jae-yong is expected to look over the electronics and finance division. His sister Lee Bu-jin will run hotels and construction, and other sister Lee Se-hyun will control Samsung's fashion and media business. Although the Tail Industries is closing operations after 60 years, market watchers say it'll keep its name as Samsung founder Lee Byung-chul had great affection for the unit. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
Well, SK's Choi Tae-won may have spent nearly all of last year in prison for embezzlement, but that didn't stop his fellow company directors from making him the best paid Korean executive of 2013. Choi took home 45.1 billion won, that's roughly $42.5 million last year. The salary details emerged on Monday as Korea's biggest companies for the first time ever made public the pay packages of some of their leading executives as required by legislation introduced last year. So, what should we make of the change? This is a follow-up to yesterday's brief package or report. And let's bring in Dr. Kim Byung-ju, the head of KLP Consulting and our regular commentator on this program. Good afternoon to you, Dr. Kim.
Good afternoon.
So, the pay package disclosed yesterday. Your reaction and how do they compare globally?
Globally, of course, the United States market would be the one that we can compare with, but the overall average is difficult to come by because the overall variation is so big. So I checked some of the numbers, and starting with the best paid one, Choi Tae-won that you just mentioned, we can compare with the U.S. market's top, executive in terms of pay amount. Comparing with their 2012 figure, we don't have a reliable 2013 yet for the United States. So using 2012 figure, Choi Tae-won's pay is about 1/3 of what the top player got. Lawrence Ellison, the head of Oracle, got about 3 times as much. So it's 1/3. Jung Mong-gu's case, whose face we were just seeing, his pay level is about the same, slightly below that of GM's current CEO person, Mary Barra. And the United States automobile top case was recorded back in 2010. The head of Ford at that time, Alan Mulally, his pay was about twice as much as what Jung Mong-gu was allegedly paid last year. So some differences, 3 times, twice as much. There are all these variations here. And some people are saying, Yellen News were saying about 1/6 on average, but I don't believe in the average numbers because the variation is so big. Choi Tae-won's case was about 10 times bigger than number 8, Ho Chang-soo's case, GS head. In terms of CEO pay. So I don't believe in average numbers, but so twice as much or 3 times as much in terms of the comparison for the top players, and I think that much we can say so far.
Now, skyrocketing executive pays or pay slips have been a big issue not only all across the globe but also in the United States as well.
Right.
And what efforts have been made so far in order to slow down that pace?
There are so many different ideas. I don't think we will have enough time to cover everything. But one thing that comes up to my mind is, for example, Dodd-Frank Act. The legislation that was introduced in the United States Congress, and that there's a particular clause that requires disclosure of the ratio of the top chief executives' pay compared to the average median pay of the workers. That ratio disclosure is required, but that has not been enacted. It's been delayed for about 4 years, and still there's no action to be taken at the U.S. Congress at this time. So it still remains as a proposal. Of course, Bill Clinton, when he was running as the candidate back in 1991, for instance, he had an interesting proposal of capping chief CEO pay at $1 million US dollars at that time. And of course, Obama has talked about ideas about somehow discouraging CEO pay's rise. And EC, European Commission in Brussels, actually is introducing a legislation that will require their listed companies to disclose that particular ratio that I was talking about, chief CEO's pay as compared to the average worker's pay. And Switzerland, for instance, last year voted on the proposal of capping the CEO pay to the ratio of 12:1. Chief CEO's pay cannot exceed 12 times of the average workers. So we have all these interesting ideas all around the world, but nothing major that has been actively enacted so far.
Now, with the disclosed information that we saw yesterday, what is the kind of direction of the debate that Korea is heading towards? We
are hearing so many different kinds of debates at this point. It almost sounds like a noise at this point. But one of the things that I know is coming from the corporate side is that the corporations are working very hard to highlight that what Korea is doing is not outlandish or outrageous. For instance, Korean corporations such as Samsung Electronics and SK, they are saying, look at the ratio, compare the chief CEO pay and compare that with operating profit. And Samsung Electronics is saying their top pay is about the ratio of 0.02%. So that's very low, comparing the registered the board members' pay as compared to the operating profit that they have made, 0.07%. And they're saying the best one who made Shin Jong-gyun, for instance, head of mobile division, his pay itself is 0.02%. So they're saying it's very, very low at this point globally compared and all that. SK Telecom is saying their ratio is 0.1%. The overall combined pay of the registered executive as compared to their operating ratio and all that. So corporations, they are very active playing this public relations game, highlighting the overall ratio itself is not so outlandish, but there are all different kinds of talks being broadcasted, if you will, at this point, being aired at this point. We are still in the confusion. Well,
the overall ratio, according to this data released yesterday, it may not be, too overlandish, if you will, but we really didn't get to see the ones disclosed that we were really curious about. For instance, Samsung owner, owner Lee Gun-hee or Lee Jae-yong.
Right.
So
indeed.
why is that the case?
Because the law does not require it. But this is a free society, and we have a freedom of press here in this country. So there are sources that are coming up with these figures. Indeed, they're showing. They're saying sources like a CEO Score, for instance. They're saying Lee Gun-hee got paid nothing in terms of his compensation as an executive, but he got a huge dividend, and he made the biggest amount of money in Korean business community last year with 108 billion won. That's what CEO Score is saying. Jung Mong-gu follows as number 2 with 64 billion, and Choi Tae-won, Jung Hee-sun, son of Jung Mong-gu, Hyundai chairman, head of Kia at this point, and Gu Bon-moo, head of LG, coming up at number 5 with 26 billion. Kim Seung-yeon, Hanwha head, and Lee Jae-yeon, CJ head. Hong Na-hee, by the way, the wife of Lee Gun-hee, coming in as number 8 in terms of money made last year. So we have all this plenty of information that are continuously coming out. So even though it's not legally required, we have this information available. So we will continue to have all these debates about this. And there are also discussions about what needs to be done about this imbalanced pay and all that. some people are talking about Germany's example of introducing a double-layered, board structure, where there will be a superstructure board that will be created, which in Germany they call it supervisory board, where not only the shareholders but also employees sit in to finally approve the CEO pays. And as a result of that, they said at the Volkswagen, actually there was a CEO pay cut last year. So some people are saying that those kind of ideas are something that we need to consider here in Korea based on all these facts and data that we got recently.
Well, the publication of these figures are, it definitely marks a step forward for this country's, notoriously erratic standards for corporate governance, if you will.
Right.
But of course, like many other things, it's in the beginning stages, and there are loopholes that need to be closed and improvements that need to be made. And, I think this will be at the topic of our discussion sometime in the near future.
Absolutely. And we get to talk about all these thanks to the openness of the society that we have achieved so far.
Definitely. All right, Dr. Kim Byung-ju, great talk today. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that is all from me at this hour. Thank you for watching. Do join me again at 6 p.m. Korea time on Early Edition at 6.